A veteran who has lost everything, drowning in despair, makes an unthinkable decision to follow an injured German Shepherd deep into a stormy forest. But this is not a rescue. The dog doesn't need his help. Instead, it moves with the discipline of a soldier, its eyes holding a secret purpose. It leads him to a place that should not exist, a secret buried for 2 decades. A secret that a ruthless corporation has spent millions to hunt for, and now they are right behind him, ready to do anything to claim it. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The paper felt heavier than a field pack, heavier than the M4 he used to carry. It was a single sheet, folded into a crisp square, but its weight pressed down on Richard Anderson's soul. The foreclosure notice. The word swam in his vision, mocking the worn dashboard of his 10-year-old pickup truck. Final notice. Delinquent. Vacate. Each word was a nail in the coffin of the life he had tried to build after the war, after Sarah. He was a tall man, with a frame that had once been filled out by military muscle but was now leaner, honed by grief and sleepless nights. His brown hair, cut short in a way he never outgrew, was flecked with silver at the temples, a map of the 38 years that felt like 100. His face was all harsh lines and sharp angles, the kind of face carved by desert suns and harsh realities, but his blue eyes held a deep, buried kindness, a light that had been struggling to stay lit. He wore his usual attire, a faded flannel shirt over a plain gray t-shirt, worn denim jeans, and sturdy work boots. It was a uniform of sorts, a way to face a civilian world that never quite felt like home. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Outside, the Montana sky had cracked open. Rain lashed against the windshield in waves, and the wipers fought a frantic, losing battle. The winding mountain road, usually a place of stark beauty, had become a treacherous ribbon of wet asphalt twisting through dense pine forests. Each sharp turn felt like a lurch in his own stomach. This was his rock bottom. A decorated veteran, a man who had led others through chaos, now unable to keep a roof over his own daughter's head. A small sound, a faint rustle of fabric, drew his gaze to the rearview mirror. Jennifer sat perfectly still in her car seat, a tiny, silent statue in the cavernous back seat. She was 8 years old, with her mother's soft brown hair and a face like a porcelain doll. Her big, dark eyes stared out at the blurry, rain-streaked world, but Richard knew she wasn't really seeing it. She was looking inward, into the quiet, protected space she had retreated to 10 months ago, the day her mother's car had met a patch of black ice. Today, she wore the red dress. It had been Sarah's favorite, a splash of vibrant crimson against the muted greens and grays of their world. Jennifer wore it often, a silent tribute, a shield. She had not spoken a single word since the accident. Her silence was not empty. It was a living thing, a heavy blanket that smothered every room, every conversation, every memory. The silence was the second enemy he faced daily, after the memories that ambushed him in the quiet hours of the night. He had spoken with therapists, with school counselors. Dr. Evans, a kind man with a gentle voice, had explained it was a trauma response, a protective shell. But knowing the name of the cage didn't make the bars disappear. He was failing her. The notice in his pocket was proof. Lost in his spiral of failure, he took the next turn too fast. The truck's old tires hydroplaned for a terrifying second. He corrected, his heart hammering against his ribs. And then, caught in the sweeping arc of his headlights, a shape materialized from the deluge. Animal. Large. Richard slammed on the brakes. The truck groaned, metal protesting as it slid sideways, coming to a shuddering halt just feet from the creature. His breath hitched, the adrenaline a familiar bitter taste in his mouth. In the pulsing glow of his hazard lights, he saw it clearly. A German Shepherd. It was lying on the wet pavement, a heap of gray and white fur, against the black road. His training, both as a medic in the army and as a human being, took over. He threw the truck into park and jumped out into the storm, the cold rain soaking him instantly. "Hey, hey, easy there," he said, his voice low and calm as he approached. He expected the dog to snarl, to cower, to try and drag itself away. That's what wounded, terrified animals did. This one did not. It lifted its head, and its eyes met his. They were not the wild, panicked eyes of an animal in pain. They were intelligent, steady, and unnervingly calm. The dog was large, powerfully built, its thick coat a beautiful mix of wolf gray and clean white. It was clearly a mature adult, in its prime. Richard could see one of its front legs was bent at an unnatural angle, the source of its immobility. Yet, it showed no fear. It simply watched him. Slowly, with a grunt of effort, the dog pushed itself up. It stood on 3 legs, its posture careful but not weak. It was a magnificent animal, even while injured. Richard took another step forward, his hand outstretched. "Let me help you." Then the dog did something extraordinary. It ignored his offer. It turned its head, looked down the dark, forbidding road, and then looked back at him. It held his gaze for a long moment. It was not a plea. It was not a challenge. It was an assessment. Then, with a quiet dignity, it turned and began to limp, step by painful step, toward the edge of the forest. After a few feet, it stopped and looked back over its shoulder. The message was as clear as a spoken command. "Follow me." Richard stood frozen in the rain, the truck's engine idling behind him, its lights cutting lonely paths through the downpour. Every rational thought screamed at him, "Get back in the truck. Go home. Your silent daughter is waiting. You have enough problems. You don't need a wounded dog." But the man who had been a soldier saw something else. He saw past the injury to the animal beneath. In the dog's stance, in its steady gaze, he saw a discipline and a profound, unsettling intelligence. It was not the behavior of a lost pet. It was the focus of a creature with a purpose, a mission. And in that moment, Richard felt a flicker of something he thought had died with Sarah, a sense of duty, a call to action that had nothing to do with bills or therapy or the crushing weight of his own grief. It was a clear, simple objective, a mission. He looked back at his truck, at the small, red-clad silhouette in the back seat. He could go back to that quiet, suffocating world of failure. Or he could take this one, single step into the unknown. The dog waited, patient in the rain. Its eyes held his, and in their depths, Richard Anderson felt an echo of the man he used to be, a man with a purpose. He took a deep breath, the cold, rain-filled air a shock to his lungs, and made his choice. He started walking. The moment Richard stepped off the asphalt and into the tree line, the world changed. The roar of the rain on the truck's roof was replaced by 1,000 softer sounds. The drip of water from pine needles, the squelch of his boots in the mud, the whisper of wind through unseen branches high above. The forest swallowed the light from his truck, leaving him in a profound and disorienting darkness. He fumbled for his phone, its flashlight cutting a weak, trembling beam into the oppressive black. Ahead of him, the German Shepherd moved with a grim determination. Richard had expected the journey to be a clumsy, painful struggle for the wounded animal. He was wrong. The dog, who he had started thinking of as Ben, displayed an economy of motion that baffled him. His limp was pronounced, yet he compensated for it with an incredible efficiency. He never crashed through bushes or fought against the terrain. Instead, he flowed through it. He navigated around fallen, moss-slick logs, used large stones to cross muddy patches, and kept to the deepest shadows as if instinctively practicing light discipline. It was not the frantic scrambling of a lost animal. It was the careful, deliberate progress of a scout navigating hostile territory. Richard's own progress was far less graceful. Thorny branches clawed at his flannel shirt, and low-hanging limbs seemed to appear out of nowhere. The ground was a treacherous mix of slick mud, hidden roots, and sharp rocks. Every few minutes, a wave of doubt would wash over him. What was he doing? Chasing a ghost through a storm while his daughter sat alone in a cold truck. The foreclosure notice felt like a block of ice in his pocket. He was a fool. A man so broken that he would follow a dog into the wilderness on a whim. But then he would look up, and his flashlight beam would catch Ben, paused 20 yards ahead, waiting. The dog's patience was unnerving. He never barked or whined. He simply stood, a silent gray and white silhouette, his intelligent eyes reflecting the light back at Richard. And in that look, Richard's resolve would harden again. This was not a whim. His soldier's intuition, the part of him that had kept him alive in places far worse than this, screamed that this was important. Every calculated step the dog took reinforced the feeling. This was not a random trail, it was a route, and the further they went, the more Richard became convinced that this path was designed to leave no trace. They walked along the edges of game trails rather than on them, and at one point Ben led him directly through the shallow rocky bed of a running creek for 100 yards, a classic military technique for breaking a trail. Nearly an hour passed. Richard was soaked through, cold, and physically exhausted. The initial adrenaline had faded, leaving a deep ache in his bones. He was on the verge of calling it quits, of turning back and facing the life he had fled, when Ben stopped. They were on a steep, densely wooded hillside. The trees here were ancient, massive Douglas firs and ponderosa pines that formed a thick canopy, making the darkness beneath them even more absolute. Ben stood at the base of a huge moss-covered rock outcropping, looking up expectantly at Richard. Richard swept his light across the rock face, then the surrounding hillside. He saw nothing, just trees, rocks, and the unending curtain of rain. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "There's nothing here." Ben let out a soft huff, a sound of gentle impatience. He took a step closer to the rock face and nudged a curtain of thick, hanging moss with his nose. Richard followed, bringing his light closer. At first, he still saw nothing but damp rock and vegetation. Then his eyes caught it. A line, a perfectly straight horizontal line extending for about 10 feet, just below a shelf of rock. Nature rarely dealt in perfect straight lines. His heart began to beat a little faster. He ran his fingers along the line. It was not a crack in the rock. It was a seam. He pushed aside more of the moss and ferns. It was a roofline, expertly fitted against the natural stone. He swept his light upward. The hillside above the line wasn't a hillside at all. It was a roof, but a roof unlike any he had ever seen. It was covered in a thick layer of soil, out of which grew the same ferns, mosses, and even small sapling trees as the surrounding forest floor. It was a living roof, a perfect piece of the Montana wilderness. He stepped back, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He traced the faint outline of the structure. It was built into the slope, half buried, as if it had grown there. The walls were not logs in the traditional sense, but a dark, textured material that the native moss clung to as if it were ancient stone. From the air, from a satellite, from anywhere more than 50 feet away, it would be utterly invisible. It wasn't just overgrown, it was assimilated. A cold certainty settled in his gut, chasing away the exhaustion. This was no forgotten hunter's shack or an old prospector's cabin. The level of engineering, the sheer perfection of the camouflage, spoke of meticulous planning and immense resources. This place was not abandoned, it was hidden, and it was hidden for a very, very good reason. Ben sat before the door, a solid, unmovable presence, and nudged it with his nose. There was no visible handle or lock, but as Richard examined the spot the dog indicated, he found a small, almost invisible indentation in the composite material. He pressed it. There was a faint hiss, like the release of a vacuum seal, and the door swung inward without a sound. The air that greeted him was not the damp, musty smell of a place left to decay. It was cool, dry, and clean, with a faint, pleasant scent of old books and cedar wood. It felt less like an abandoned cabin and more like a time capsule. Ben walked past him, his limp still evident, but his movements confident, and went directly to a hand-braided rug by a large, cold stone fireplace. He lay down with a soft sigh of contentment, the sigh of a soldier returning to his post. This was not just a place he knew, it was his home. Richard stepped inside, his boots silent on the smooth, polished wooden floor. The interior was a single, large room, and it was unbelievably preserved. A simple, handmade bed was tucked into one corner, its wool blanket neatly folded. A small table and 2 chairs sat in the center. Bookshelves, built directly into the walls, were filled with texts on physics, engineering, and philosophy. Everything was meticulously organized and clean, covered only by the thinnest, most uniform layer of dust, the kind that settles from still air over many years. It was impossible. No structure, no matter how well built, should have been this pristine after 2 decades of Montana winters. His attention was drawn to a sturdy desk sitting beneath a window that was completely obscured by the thick vines outside. Unlike the rest of the room, its surface was clear of dust. On it, a single leather-bound journal lay open, a fountain pen resting beside it as if the writer had merely paused mid-thought. Richard felt a shiver of reverence, a sense that he was intruding on a sacred space. He approached the desk and looked down at the open page. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and confident. The 12th of October, 2004. The molecular lattice is finally stable. After 17 years of theory and failure, it holds. The energy density is even higher than my calculations predicted. A single unit, no larger than a car battery, could power a home for a year. A year. The implications are staggering. We can end our addiction to oil. We can give clean, limitless energy to the world. We can heal the planet. I feel like Prometheus, having stolen fire from the gods. Richard's breath caught in his throat. He gently lifted the cover of the journal. The embossed letters read simply, "A Finch." He turned back to the first page and began to read, sinking into one of the chairs as the world outside, the storm, his truck, and even his own desperate situation faded away. He learned the writer was Dr. Alistair Finch, a physicist who had quietly walked away from a prestigious university career to pursue his work in private. For over an hour, Richard read, completely absorbed. The early entries were filled with the pure joy of discovery, the passionate, almost poetic descriptions of a man unlocking the universe's secrets. Then, the tone began to change. The 2nd of March, 2005. I was approached today by a representative from Omnicorp, a polite man in an expensive suit. He claimed they were interested in funding my research. I was flattered, but cautious. Their business is fossil fuels. Why would they want to fund their own extinction? The 19th of April, 2005. The polite man came back. The offer was no longer for funding. It was for an acquisition. They want to buy everything. The patents, the research, my prototypes. He used words like market synergy and strategic integration. I used a simpler word, no. His smile did not change, but his eyes grew cold. May 11, 2005. It is no longer polite. They are pressuring my suppliers, questioning my former colleagues. They are not trying to acquire my work anymore. They are trying to bury it. I see their strategy now. They want to own the fire, not to share it, but to hide it away in a vault where it can never threaten their empire. Richard looked up from the journal, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and anger. He now understood the purpose of this hidden place. It was a sanctuary, built to protect a world-changing idea from a world that was not ready for it. But the question of how it had survived remained. His eyes scanned the bookshelves. One volume was different from the others. It was not a printed book, but another handwritten journal, thicker than the first, with the word sanctuary on its spine. He pulled it down. This was not a personal diary, but a meticulous, technical log. The 5th of August, 2002. The exterior shell is complete. My polymer wood composite is performing beyond expectations. The native mosses are already taking root on the northern wall. In a few years, it will be indistinguishable from the hillside. The material is self-sealing and should resist decay for centuries. Richard ran his hand along the wall, It felt smooth and solid, with an almost organic texture. He flipped further into the log. The 14th of September, 2003. Prototype 7 is online. The power output is stable. It is now powering the entire facility, including the climate control and air filtration systems. Based on its current energy decay rate, it should continue to do so for the next 50 years without any maintenance. This place is now a self-sufficient, self-sustaining ark. It all clicked into place. The clean air, the perfect preservation, the lack of decay. This cabin was not just a shelter, it was a living demonstration of Finch's genius. It was a fortress, powered by the very secret it was built to protect. Richard stood up and walked around the small room, seeing it now with new eyes. Every joint, every shelf, every simple piece of furniture was a testament to one man's desperate, brilliant plan to save the future. He looked over at Ben, who had been watching him with those same steady, intelligent eyes. The dog hadn't made a sound the entire time Richard was reading. He was more than just a pet who had stumbled upon his master's old home. He was a guardian, a silent, loyal sentinel, waiting for someone to finally arrive and read the story he had protected for so long. Number 1. Ooh. Richard stared at the technical log in his hands, the weight of Dr. Finch's words settling upon him. He looked at Ben, who had risen from the rug and was now standing by the massive stone fireplace, watching him with that same unnerving patience. The single room, which had seemed so complete just moments ago, now felt like a foyer, a simple antechamber to a much larger secret. Richard knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that he had not yet seen the heart of this place. As if confirming his thoughts, Ben took a step toward the fireplace and nudged a specific, dark-colored stone with his nose. Nothing happened. He then lifted his good front paw and pressed 2 other stones in a quick sequence. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a low grinding sound echoed from deep within the structure, the sound of immense weight shifting, a section of the stone hearth, a piece that Richard would have sworn was a single, solid slab of granite, retracted smoothly into the floor. It revealed a steep, narrow staircase made of steel, descending into a cool, perfect darkness. The air that rose from the opening was different from the air in the cabin. It was colder, sterile, carrying the faint, clean scent of ozone and chilled metal. Ben looked back at Richard, his eyes a clear invitation, and then started down the steps without hesitation. Richard's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct for self-preservation told him to turn away, to leave this place and its secrets behind. But the soldier in him, the man awakened by a mission, could not retreat. He took a deep breath and followed the dog down into the earth. The staircase ended on a polished concrete floor. A motion sensor triggered soft, indirect lighting along the ceiling, revealing a long, sterile corridor. The walls were not wood or stone, but smooth, seamless metal. The transition was jarring. He had left a rustic 19th-century cabin and entered a 21st-century laboratory. Ben led him through the corridor and to a heavy steel door that slid open at their approach. Richard stepped through, and for the second time that night, his world tilted on its axis. He was standing in a laboratory that would have been the envy of any major university. Stainless steel workbenches lined the walls, covered with complex equipment he couldn't begin to identify. Wires and conduits ran in neat, organized lines across the high ceiling. The entire space was bathed in a clean, white light, and the only sound was the low, steady hum of machinery. But it was the center of the room that stole his breath. Arranged on a series of pedestals, encased in thick, reinforced glass, were a dozen metallic cylinders. They were the prototypes, the molecular batteries. Each one was a different size and shape, a clear line of technological evolution. They seemed to thrum with a contained, silent power, the sleeping giants of a new age. Ben padded over to what looked like a master control station, a large console built into the far wall. He nudged a panel at its base, and a holographic display shimmered to life in the air above it, showing a detailed schematic of the entire facility. Richard approached, mesmerized. What he saw was not a cabin with a basement. It was a multi-level underground complex, a massive structure hidden beneath a few feet of dirt and a brilliantly camouflaged entrance. His fingers traced the glowing lines of the display, his mind racing to comprehend the scale of Finch's creation. He found a file labeled Sanctuary Defense Systems. He opened it. Blueprints and technical notes filled the air. He saw a cross-section of the facility's outer walls, which were interwoven with a dense metallic mesh. The notes called it a Faraday cage, designed to block any and all electronic signals from entering or escaping. Total electronic invisibility. He found another schematic detailing the climate control. It showed a network of pipes running from the laboratory deep into the earth, connecting to a geothermal spring hundreds of feet below. The system used the constant temperature of the Earth to regulate the facility, venting what little excess heat the prototypes produced so far underground that it would be undetectable on the surface. Thermal cloaking. It would be invisible to infrared scans. There were notes on the acoustic dampening panels lining every corridor and room, materials that absorbed sound and vibration, ensuring the hum of the laboratory would never reach the ears of a wandering hiker or a listening device. Richard stepped back from the console, a profound sense of awe washing over him. This was not just a hiding place. It was a fortress, an impregnable, invisible fortress designed by a genius who had anticipated every possible method of detection. Dr. Finch had not simply run away. He had retreated to a defensible position, dug in, and prepared for a long, quiet war. He had built this place not just to continue his work, but to withstand a siege from a relentless and powerful enemy. The weight of that realization was immense. The secrets contained in this place were not just revolutionary, they were dangerous enough to warrant this level of protection. Richard looked from the glowing blueprints to the silent, powerful prototypes, and then to the gray and white dog standing guard at his side. He finally understood. Ben was not just a guardian of a place. He was the warden of a power that could change the course of human history. Ben led him back through the silent, dripping forest. The path seemed shorter, easier now, as if the woods themselves had accepted him. The storm had broken, and the first hints of a pale, gray dawn were filtering through the canopy. When they reached the road, Richard's truck sat waiting, a familiar island of steel and rust in a world that had been turned upside down. Jennifer was still asleep in the back seat. He knelt down and placed a hand on Ben's powerful shoulder. The dog's fur was thick and warm. "I'll be back," Richard whispered, not knowing if he was making a promise to the dog or to himself. Ben looked at him with his steady, knowing eyes, then turned and vanished back into the shadows of the forest. The drive home was surreal. The foreclosure notice on the passenger seat seemed trivial now, a problem from a different lifetime. He was the keeper of a secret that could rewrite human history. The responsibility was a physical weight, heavier than any burden he had ever carried. He dropped Jennifer at the home of his neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kind, grandmotherly woman with worried eyes who looked at his soaked clothes and exhausted face with undisguised concern. He muttered something about a long, difficult night shift and promised to be back in a few hours to sleep. But sleep was impossible. Back in his small, quiet house, with the stacks of unopened bills on the kitchen table, the silence felt different. It was no longer just the silence of grief. It was the silence of a secret. He sat down at his old, slow laptop, the ghosts of Dr. Finch's journals swirling in his mind. He had to know more. He had to understand the enemy. He started with the name from the journals, Dr. Alistair Finch. The search results were sparse. A few brilliant academic papers on theoretical physics from the late 1992, a grainy photo on a university website, showing a man with kind eyes and a wild mane of graying hair. And then, around 2004, nothing. The man had become a digital ghost, just as he had intended. Next, Richard typed Omnicorp into the search bar. The results were the opposite, a flood of polished corporate propaganda. Their website was a slick presentation of a global energy giant, complete with photos of gleaming solar farms and smiling executives shaking hands. They had an entire section dedicated to their commitment to a sustainable future. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. These were the people who had tried to bury Finch's miracle to protect their profits. They were liars, wolves dressed in the sheep's clothing of green energy. He didn't know it, but hundreds of miles away, in a chilled, sterile data center, his actions had not gone unnoticed. For 2 decades, a sophisticated AI had been scanning the global web, its sole purpose to watch for any mention of its creator's ghost. For years, the keyword string Alistair Finch physicist Montana had lain dormant. Now, it had been triggered. A high-priority alert flashed on a monitor, a search originating from a low-population, residential IP address in the very mountain range Finch was last suspected of inhabiting. A ghost had stirred. Within minutes, a brief, encrypted directive was sent to a regional security contractor. A valuable lead had emerged. Investigate. Discreetly. Richard shut the laptop, a sense of deep unease settling over him. He felt like he had disturbed a hornet's nest. He picked up Jennifer later that day, forcing a smile he didn't feel. He tried to fall back into their routine of quiet meals and unspoken grief, but something had shifted. The world felt sharper, more dangerous. The first time he saw the car, he dismissed it. A plain black sedan, the kind of forgettable vehicle that blends into any background. It was parked 2 blocks down from his house, nothing to worry about. The next day, he saw it again, this time in the parking lot of the grocery store, parked 3 rows away, facing his truck. His military training, the instincts that had been dormant for years, began to stir. His senses sharpened. He started paying attention to reflections in shop windows, to the cars that stayed 2 or 3 lengths behind him on the road. The feeling of being watched, a feeling he knew all too well from his time overseas, began to prickle at the back of his neck. The confirmation came 3 days after his trip to the sanctuary. He was picking Jennifer up from her elementary school. As he waited in the line of cars, he saw it. The same black sedan, parked across the street. A man in the driver's seat, pretending to read something on his phone. But his eyes weren't on the phone. They were on the school's entrance. They were on Jennifer. A cold, primal fury rose in Richard's chest. This was the line. They were watching his daughter. He held his breath, forcing the anger down, replacing it with the cold, clear focus he had learned in combat. He was no longer just a grieving father. He was a soldier again. He put on a calm face as Jennifer climbed into the truck, her red dress a bright, innocent flame. He buckled her in, his movements steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside him. But as he pulled away from the school, his eyes met the reflection of the black sedan in his rear-view mirror. It pulled out from the curb, keeping a professional, calculated distance. He had taken the bait. He had searched for the ghost, and in doing so, he had led the hunters right to his door. The war Dr. Finch had prepared for was no longer a story in a journal. It was here, and it was just beginning. The drive home was the longest 10 minutes of Richard's life. Every passing headlight felt like a threat. Every shadow seemed to hold an enemy. In his rearview mirror, the black sedan remained, a persistent, predatory shark in the waters of his quiet life. He pulled into his driveway, got Jennifer out of the truck, and walked into his house, forcing a casualness he did not feel. He could feel their eyes on him, watching, cataloging, waiting. The threat was no longer a vague notion from a dead man's journal. It was real, and it was breathing down his neck. That night, he made his decision. They could not stay. These people, whoever they were professionals. They would not give up. And they had made the fatal mistake of watching his daughter. He was a soldier, and a soldier's first duty is to protect what matters. He waited until well after midnight, when the street was cloaked in a deep, rural darkness. He had spent the last hours preparing. A small duffel bag for Jennifer with a change of clothes, her favorite worn teddy bear, and some non-perishable food. He knelt by her bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. "Time for an adventure, sweet pea," he whispered, gently waking her. "We're going on a special camping trip, just you and me." She looked at him with her wide, trusting eyes and allowed him to dress her. Her silence, a familiar ache in his heart. He did not use the front door. He led Jennifer out the back, through the overgrown yard, and over the low fence into the woods that bordered their property. It was the beginning of an escape route he had mapped in his head years ago, a relic of a paranoia he thought he had left behind in the desert. Using his veteran skills, his knowledge of the land, he moved them through the darkness with purpose. They emerged on a different road a quarter-mile away, where he had quietly parked his truck hours earlier. He had shaken the tail before they even knew he was gone. The drive back to the mountains was a tense, silent journey under a canopy of stars. Jennifer, wrapped in a blanket, fell asleep in the passenger seat, her small face peaceful. Richard drove, his senses on high alert, constantly scanning the darkness behind them. He was running on pure adrenaline and a fierce, protective instinct. He was taking his daughter away from the only home she knew, taking her to a dead man's fortress, guided by the memory of a ghost dog. He was either saving her life or he had finally lost his mind. He parked in the same hidden turnoff as before. This time, the journey into the forest felt different. It was not a desperate, confused stumble. It was a calculated infiltration. He carried a sleeping Jennifer in his arms, her head resting on his shoulder, and walked the nameless trail with a new sense of purpose. As they neared the camouflaged structure, a large shape detached itself from the shadows. Ben. The dog approached not with a bark or a growl, but with a low, welcoming whine. He sniffed at Jennifer's dangling feet, then looked up at Richard, his eyes conveying a clear understanding. He had been waiting for them. Richard set Jennifer down gently as he worked the hidden mechanism for the door. She blinked sleepily, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. When she saw the massive dog standing silently beside her, she did not flinch or cry out. Richard held his breath. For 10 months, his daughter had been a fortress unto herself, letting no one in. Jennifer looked at the big German shepherd, her head tilted with a child's frank curiosity. Ben stood perfectly still, allowing her to observe him. Then, very slowly, she raised a small hand. She did not try to pet him, but simply held it out, an offering of trust. Ben took a soft step forward and gently nudged her palm with his cold, wet nose. Jennifer's fingers curled slightly, brushing against his fur. A connection was made, a silent understanding, passing between the girl who could not speak and the dog who did not need to. Richard pushed the door open, and a wave of warm, dry air washed over them. He guided Jennifer inside. Her eyes, so often vacant and distant, widened with a quiet wonder. She took in the simple wooden furniture, the books lining the walls, the soft glow of the lights that Richard now knew how to activate. Instead of fear, her face showed something he hadn't seen in almost a year: fascination. She seemed to recognize what he had felt instantly. This place was safe. She walked to the braided rug by the fireplace, the spot Ben had claimed as his own. She sat down, crossing her small legs, and looked at the room as if it were a magical cottage from one of her old fairy tales. Ben followed and lay down beside her, a few feet away, a respectful guardian. He rested his massive head on his paws, his gaze never leaving the little girl in the red dress. Richard's heart felt like it was going to break, not from sorrow, but from a fragile, terrifying hope. He watched as Jennifer reached out again, this time with more confidence, and rested her hand on Ben's thick, gray and white fur. She began to stroke his back, a slow, rhythmic motion. He stood there for a long time, a silent observer, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell. He had brought her here to protect her from a physical threat, but he watched now as the sanctuary performed a different kind of miracle. It was healing her. Jennifer stopped petting the dog. She looked up at Richard, her eyes clear and present in a way they hadn't been for so long. The silence in the room stretched, filled with a potent, unspoken emotion. Then she opened her mouth. Her voice, when it came, was a soft, rusty whisper. the most beautiful sound Richard had ever heard. "His name is Ben, isn't it, Daddy?" Tears welled in Richard's eyes, hot and sudden. He couldn't speak. He could only nod, a wave of relief and joy so powerful it buckled his knees. His daughter was back. The fortress had saved them both. The next morning Richard woke to a sound he thought he might never hear again. The sound of his daughter's laughter. He lay still on the simple cot in the cabin's main room, listening. The soft morning light filtered through the high, vine-covered windows, painting the room in gentle hues of green and gold. Jennifer was sitting on the floor with Ben, chattering away as she built a small tower out of pine cones they had gathered. Ben lay patiently, his head on his paws, occasionally letting out a soft rumble of contentment as she explained her architectural choices to him. For the first time in 10 months, the silence was gone. It had been replaced by the bright, happy cadence of a child's voice. Richard felt a warmth spread through his chest, a profound sense of peace he hadn't felt since before Sarah's death. This place, this strange, impossible sanctuary, was a miracle. He watched them for a while, a father rediscovering his daughter. Jennifer was completely at ease, her small hands moving confidently, her posture relaxed. She leaned against Ben's broad, furry side, using him as a backrest. The massive German shepherd seemed perfectly content with this arrangement. As she leaned in to whisper a secret to him, her fingers idly combed through the thick fur around his neck. That's when she found it. "Daddy," she said, her voice filled with curiosity, "Ben has a necklace." Richard sat up. Jennifer's fingers were working at something metallic, something dark and tarnished, that was so deeply embedded in the dog's ruff that it had become nearly invisible. Ben remained perfectly still, a model of canine patience, as Jennifer carefully worked the object free from the dense fur. It was a collar, but not a normal one. It was a solid, flat band of metal, blackened with age. She brought it over to him. "It has writing on it," and sighed. Richard took the metal band. It was heavier than it looked. He rubbed his thumb over the surface, clearing away decades of tarnish. Faint, elegant script, the same script from the journals, became visible. With a sense of trembling anticipation, he angled the collar toward the light. Ben, faithful companion to Alistair Finch, born 2003. The words hit Richard with the force of a physical blow. He read them again, his mind refusing to accept what they meant. Born 2003. He did the math, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. It was August 2025. That would make this dog 22 years old. It was impossible. Ben was in the absolute prime of his life, a powerful, healthy animal with the strength and stamina of a dog a quarter of that age. Richard looked from the impossible date on the collar to the magnificent animal sitting calmly by his daughter's side. This changed everything. He now understood that Finch's genius went far beyond energy and material science. He scooped Jennifer into his arms. "Sweetheart, I need you to stay up here with Ben for a little while. I need to check something in the workshop." He hurried down the steel staircase into the laboratory, the cold metal collar clutched in his hand. He went straight to the holographic console, his mind racing. He bypassed the files on physics and engineering. He searched for a different category: biology, medicine, genetics. A folder appeared, one he had overlooked before. It was labeled simply Project Guardian. It was encrypted. As he stared at the password prompt, he felt a familiar presence at his side. Ben was there, looking from Richard's face to the screen. The dog lifted his paw and gently tapped a sequence of keys on the physical console below the display. The folder unlocked. It was Finch's private medical log, a record of his most secret and dangerous experiment. Richard began to read, his hands shaking. The 28th of October, 2003. I found him today, a small pup abandoned near the creek, no more than 8 weeks old. He is sick. The local vet confirms a rare genetic disorder causing rapid cellular decay. He says the pup won't live to see his first birthday. I cannot bear the thought of losing my only companion in this self-imposed exile. The 15th of November, 2003. A dangerous thought has taken root. My energy technology works by stabilizing molecular bonds to store and release power. What if the same principle could be applied to living tissue? What if a precisely controlled energy field could be used to correct the errors in cell replication, to halt the decay, to halt aging itself? It is unethical. It is monstrous. But the alternative is watching my only friend die. The 4th of February, 2005. The treatment is working. I have done it. Ben's cellular regeneration is now stable and self-sustaining. His physical age appears to have frozen at the equivalent of a 2-year-old adult. All indicators suggest the process is permanent. I have not only saved him, I have granted him a lifespan I cannot predict. An unexpected side effect is also emerging. His neural pathways are operating with near-perfect efficiency. His problem-solving abilities are astonishing. He is not just living longer, he is becoming more. Richard sank into the operator's chair, overwhelmed. Ben wasn't just a smart dog, he was a biological miracle, living proof of a technology that could end disease and aging forever. He was the most valuable and dangerous secret in this entire fortress. As this monumental truth settled upon him, a single, silent red light began to flash on the console. Ben didn't wait. His calm demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, high alert. He was instantly on his feet, every muscle tensed. He strode to the console and nudged a different panel. The main holographic display flickered to life, showing a matrix of images. They were feeds from hidden cameras, positioned around the exterior of the sanctuary. Richard's blood ran cold. The images showed at least 3 black, heavy-duty SUVs navigating the rugged forest terrain. They were moving slowly, but directly toward their location. Men in dark tactical gear, armed with assault rifles, were getting out, fanning out, and forming a perfect, professional perimeter. They knew exactly where they were going. The fragile peace of the morning was shattered. The hunters had found them. Richard looked from the screens, showing the approaching army to the immortal guardian standing steadfastly beside him. The war had arrived. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Richard. His first and only thought was Jennifer. He swept her up from the floor, her small body trembling slightly as she picked up on his fear. "It's okay, sweet pea," he murmured, his voice tight. "We're just going to play a new game. It's called Quiet Hide and Seek." Ben was already in motion, a calm, decisive presence in the rising tide of fear. He led them away from the main laboratory, down a narrower corridor that Richard hadn't noticed before. It ended at a heavy, vault-like door that slid open into a smaller, more fortified room. This was the heart of the fortress, its nerve center. The walls were reinforced, and a large console dominated the space, its main screen still showing the chilling feeds from the exterior cameras. Richard settled Jennifer in a padded alcove in the corner, giving her the teddy bear from her bag. "You stay right here with Ben. You'll be safe." See. He turned his attention to the screens, his soldier's mind taking over, assessing the threat. The men outside moved with the chilling efficiency of a well-trained military unit. They were not mercenaries. They were corporate soldiers, equipped with the best gear money could buy. One figure, however, stood apart from the others. She was not in tactical gear. She was standing near one of the SUVs, watching the operation unfold, and she was wearing a tailored, expensive business suit that was absurdly out of place in the Montana wilderness. This was the leader. Ben seemed to know it too, nudging a control that zoomed in on her face. Even through the grainy, low-light feed, Richard could see her clearly. She was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent features and dark hair pulled back in a severe, immaculate bun. Her posture was rigid, her expression a mask of cold impatience. She radiated an aura of absolute authority. A crackle of static came from a speaker on the console, and suddenly they could hear their communications. "Alpha team in position on the north side. No entry points visible," a gruff voice reported. "Scanners?" The woman's voice was crisp, clear and laced with irritation. "Negative, ma'am. Thermal is flat. No heat signature. It's the same temperature as the ground around it. No EM emissions, no radio signals. It's a complete dead zone. It's like it's not there." Richard saw the woman, their leader, press her fingers to her temple for a moment. Her name, according to the file Richard had briefly seen, was Taylor. She was the one in Finch's journals, the executive from Omnicorp. "I do not care what your scanners say, Captain," Taylor's voice cut through the air. "The intel that cost us $10 million says that structure is the entrance. It is not a rock. Find a way in. Now." Richard watched as the tactical team, whom he now knew was Alpha Team, began a systematic examination of the cabin. They tried to pry at the door seam with a Halligan bar, but the tool screeched against the composite material, unable to find purchase. They ran electronic decryption devices near the door, searching for a hidden lock, but the devices found nothing. The fortress was silent. It was invisible. It was perfect. Jennifer had crept over to his side, her eyes wide as she watched the screens. She pointed a small finger at Taylor. "She's the bad people, Daddy," she whispered. "Yes, Sweet Pea. She's the bad people." On the screen, Taylor's patience finally snapped. He saw her tap her earpiece, her voice now sharp and final. "I'm done waiting. This asset has been in the wind for 2 decades. I am not leaving here empty-handed. Prep the breaching charges. If we can't open the door, we'll take it off. And Fex." A chill went through Richard. They were going to blow it. They were going to destroy this beautiful, intricate creation without a second thought, all to get to the technology hidden below. He felt a surge of helpless rage. They were trapped. But Ben was not idle. The dog had moved to a different part of the console, a section that was dark and unmarked. He pressed a sequence of panels with his paw. A secondary screen flickered to life, showing not camera feeds, but a new set of schematics. These were not the passive defenses Richard had seen before. These were active. He saw diagrams of the internal security system. He saw layouts for a non-lethal gas dispersal network built into the ventilation. He saw the controls for an electromagnetic pulse generator located directly beneath the cabin. And he saw that the user interface was not a complex wall of code, but a series of intuitive, clearly labeled commands. Finch had designed it for a crisis. He had designed it for someone like Richard. Ben looked from the newly activated defense console to Richard. His calm, intelligent eyes held a clear and heavy message. "He built this fortress to be defended. I am its guardian, but you are its commander. The choice is yours." Richard's hand trembled as he raised it toward the glowing screen. On the main monitor, he saw the tactical team placing a series of explosive charges around the perfectly sealed cabin door. A small digital timer appeared in the corner of their heads-up display. It began to count down from 60 seconds, 59, 58. He was a father whose only duty was to keep his child safe by hiding. But he was also a soldier, looking at the controls of a weapon that could fight back. He looked at Jennifer, then at Ben, then back at the timer. The weight of Finch's legacy, of this entire impossible situation, settled squarely on his shoulders. He had to choose. The timer on the screen read 15 seconds, 14. Richard looked at Jennifer, her small face pale in the glow of the monitors. He saw the absolute trust in her eyes. He would not fail her. He turned to Ben. "Protect her, no matter what." The dog gave a low, rumbling affirmative, his eyes fixed on Jennifer. Richard strode up the stairs. He took a deep, steadying breath and pushed the cabin door open, stepping out into the cold night air. The world outside was a chaotic scene of tactical lights and armed men. The Alpha team leader spun around, weapon raised, shock clear on his face. "Hold your fire," the man commanded. Richard stood his ground, his hands raised and open to show he was unarmed. He was one man in a flannel shirt against a squad of corporate soldiers. He was impossibly outmatched, and that was his only advantage. They would not expect him to be a threat. "Call off your men," Richard said, his voice calm and even. "Leave this place. You don't understand what you are dealing with." The team leader's earpiece crackled. Taylor's voice, sharp and commanding, echoed faintly in the night. "Ask him his name." "Sir, identify yourself." "My name is Richard Anderson, and you are trespassing." The pause was brief. Taylor had his profile. She knew who he was. "Mr. Anderson." Her voice now came clearly through the leader's radio, a sound of pure, condescending power. "You are a squatter in possession of stolen corporate assets. You have 5 seconds to surrender and provide access to the facility. This is not your property. It belongs to Dr. Finch." A cold, humorless laugh. "Dr. Finch is a ghost. Now, about my offer. I know your daughter is in there. A tragic story. It would be a shame if it became more tragic. Cooperate, and we will ensure Jennifer's safety. Refuse, and we cannot be held responsible for what happens when we breach that door." That was it. The line had been crossed. The threat against Jennifer hung in the air, a declaration of war. Richard's face became a mask of cold fury. Down in the command center, Ben, who had heard every word over the open comms, needed no other signal. His duty was clear. He was a guardian, and the child under his protection had just been threatened. Ben's paw moved across the control panel with practiced precision. Above ground, the world fell apart for Alpha Team. A low hum vibrated through the ground for less than a second, and then every piece of their advanced technology died at once. The lights on their rifles, their night vision goggles, their radios, all went black. They were plunged into a sudden, disorienting darkness, their only light, the moon and Richard's silhouette. Before they could react, a loud clang echoed behind Richard as the composite door to the cabin slammed shut, sealing him outside with them. At the same time, from within the lab they could not see, other heavy security doors slid into place, a fact they would only discover if they ever got inside. Then came a soft hissing sound from hidden vents around the cabin's foundation. "Gas?" the team leader choked out, fumbling for a mask he could no longer see. "Gas! Get back!" But it was too late. The soporific agent Finch had developed was fast-acting and odorless. Men coughed, their movements becoming sluggish. They stumbled, disoriented, their training useless against an invisible enemy. And into that chaos, a ghost moved. From a hidden panel in the rock face, Ben emerged. He was not a snarling beast, but a silent, fluid shadow. He moved with impossible speed and precision through the stumbling soldiers. There was a sharp crack as he used his own body to strike a rifle from one man's hands. A blur of gray and white, and another soldier was on the ground, his sidearm skittering away into the darkness. The man disarmed by a perfectly applied nerve strike from the dog's powerful jaws that did not even break the skin. It was not a fight. It was a systematic, surgical neutralization. In less than 10 seconds, the entire elite squad was unconscious or incapacitated, their weapons scattered uselessly on the forest floor. Richard watched in stunned silence, then turned and walked back to the cabin. The door opened for him, and he descended back into the fortress. On the main monitor in the command center, one camera feed was still active, a hardwired EMP-proof camera focused on Taylor's position. He could see her face, illuminated by the glow of her tablet, her expression one of utter disbelief and incandescent rage. Her army had been defeated, and she didn't even know how. Richard walked past the console, past Jennifer, who was being calmly shielded by Ben, and into the main laboratory. He walked to the back wall, to a section that looked like solid steel. It was the main vault, the place Finch had stored his greatest works. Taylor's feed was likely transmitting to her tablet. He knew she was watching him. He placed his palm on a small, recessed panel on the vault door. It was not a keypad. It was a biometric scanner, waiting for a sign of worthiness Finch had programmed long ago. Richard thought of the first line he had read in the journal, the words of a man who dreamed of saving the world. "For the betterment of all humanity," Richard said, his voice clear and steady. The scanner glowed green. With a deep, resonant hum, the massive vault door began to slide open. A brilliant, pure white light spilled out into the laboratory, illuminating the rows of perfected prototypes and, at its center, the humming, beautiful core of Finch's clean energy generator. On the monitor, Richard saw Taylor's face go pale. She saw the light. She saw the vault. She saw him, the lone veteran, standing not as a squatter, but as the master of the fortress. He had not just survived. He had inherited. He was the successor. Chapter 10. A New Dawn. The brilliant light from the open vault cast long shadows across the laboratory. On the monitor, Taylor's face was a mask of cold fury, the image of a queen whose castle had just been taken, but she was powerless. Richard ignored her, stepping into the vault. In the center of the room, next to the master energy generator, sat a sealed titanium case. On it, a simple plaque read, "For my successor." Richard carried the case to the main console. Inside, he found a data drive and a single sealed letter written on heavy parchment. He opened the letter first. It was Finch's final testament. "My friend," it began, "if you are reading this, you have proven yourself worthy. You have faced the dragon, and you have not faltered. But know this, the power you now guard is too great for any one person, corporation, or government. To own it is to be corrupted by it. It must not be owned. It must be stewarded." The drive in this case contains two things: all the evidence needed to dismantle Omnicorp's criminal enterprise and the contact information for a small, clandestine unit within the Department of Energy. They are not politicians. They are scientists and soldiers who still believe in doing the right thing. Trust them to handle the dragon, but never, ever give them the keys to the Horde. Your true mission is not to reveal this technology to the world, but to bleed its gifts into the world, drop by drop, where they are needed most. Heal the sick, give water to the thirsty, and light to the darkness. Do this, and you will have honored my legacy. Your predecessor, Alistair Finch. Following the instructions, Richard used a secure satellite communication system built into the console. He spoke to a calm, professional voice on the other end, relaying a simple code phrase from Finch's letter. The response was immediate. "We are on our way." Before dawn, two silent, unmarked helicopters descended into the clearing. A small, efficient team of professionals, dressed in nondescript federal gear, took a defeated Taylor and her entire unconscious squad into custody. Richard handed their quiet leader the data drive. The man nodded, his face giving nothing away. "Omnicorp will be dealt with. This location will be stricken from every record. You have our gratitude and our silence." And just as quickly as they had come, they were gone, leaving the forest to the quiet peace of the coming morning. The immediate threat was over. 6 months later, the world was a different place. Richard and Jennifer no longer lived in the small house, haunted by ghosts and shadowed by debt. Using a small portion of the funds Finch had left hidden for his successor, they had bought a modest, comfortable home on a few acres of land in a quiet valley on the other side of the mountains. The foreclosure notice was a forgotten nightmare. Jennifer was a different person. Her silence had been washed away, replaced by a torrent of questions, laughter, and stories. She had a new school, new friends, and a light in her eyes that Richard thought had been extinguished forever. The vibrant red dress was still her favorite, but now it was a symbol of joy, not a shield of grief. In their new workshop, a converted barn, their true work was done. They had established the Finch Legacy Foundation, a small, unassuming nonprofit with a simple mission: humanitarian aid. It was their cover. This afternoon, they were packing a crate. Inside was a device the size of a shoebox. Richard watched as Jennifer, now an expert, ran the final diagnostic. It was a water purifier. Powered by a tiny, sealed-off version of the molecular battery, it could produce 500 gallons of perfectly clean drinking water a day from any source, with no other power needed. "This one is going to the village in Peru, right, Daddy?" she asked, her voice bright with purpose. "That's the one, Sweet Pea," Richard said, his heart swelling with pride. They were not changing the world, with a grand announcement. They were changing it one village, one clinic, one family at a time. They had already sent out dozens of devices, medical scanners that could detect diseases early, small power units that could light up a rural school, purifiers that could stop the spread of cholera. They were the silent guardians of a better future, bleeding hope into the world, drop by drop. Later that evening, the three of them sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the towering peaks of the Montana Rockies. The sky was painted in fiery shades of orange and deep purple. Ben, the immortal guardian, was dozing peacefully at Jennifer's feet, his long vigil finally transformed into a life of quiet contentment. Jennifer leaned against her father's side. "Are you happy, Daddy?" Richard looked down at his daughter, at her bright, curious face, so full of life and promise. He thought of the broken man in the pickup truck, drowning in a storm of his own making. He thought of the silent, intelligent dog who had offered him a mission instead of an escape. He thought of the journey that had taken them from the deepest darkness into this beautiful, peaceful light. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am." He had found his healing, not by erasing the past, but by building a future. In protecting Finch's legacy, he had created his own. He, Jennifer, and Ben. A soldier, a child, and a guardian. A strange, impossible, and perfect family, watching the last light fade, secure in their purpose, at peace with the world. They were home. Number 1. Ooh. It is a profound truth that our deepest healing often begins not when we focus on our own wounds, but when we answer the call to protect another. The unwavering loyalty of an animal and the fierce love of a family can truly guide us out of the darkest storms and into a new dawn. If this story of courage and renewal touched your heart, you can help us share this message of hope by liking this video and letting us know in the comments what loyalty means to you. By subscribing, you become part of a community that celebrates these incredible bonds. And our next story, about a friendship that defied all odds, has just appeared on your screen. We invite you to continue the journey with us.